Well, thank you, Mr. Lane, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Also, a family member of mine is present this morning, my Aunt Janet. She's all the way from Pearland, Texas. Yeah. She said, she watched last Wednesday and said, "Nephew, I'm going to come see you." And so she's here today. Thank you, Aunt Janet.
And she's
all
real
right.
family.
Well, this week we were reading Judges chapter 7. And so, as is our tradition, I want to check in with you all. We're in 5, Gideon 5?
I just wanted to clarify.
Chapter 5 in the book, Judges chapter 7. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. Sorry. Chapter 5 in the book, Judges chapter 7 in the Bible. All right. So, some of you also may be aware that there is a trail ride that's going to be happening at 10:30 coming in the parking lot. So,
I am really excited about that.
yeah. So, I wouldn't be a good Texan if I didn't allow you gracefully to exit if you wanted to. So, if you want to go out to the trail ride, please don't feel that I'm holding you hostage, and it's okay to leave. All right? I won't be judging. Miss O, do you know the name of the trail ride?
Valley Lodge, I believe. Valley. I want to say Valley Forge, but I know that's Pennsylvania. I'm a Yankee. But I think it's Valley Lodge.
Valley Lodge.
Valley Lodge Trail Ride.
Okay. Valley Lodge Trail Ride at 10:30.
10:30. I think they come in through this back way right here. So I'm going to keep, not that I'm not looking and pay attention, but I might keep looking this way.
Okay.
And
then we're going to all stand up and look when Linda does.
Linda's going to excuse herself and run.
So how was the reading for everybody this week? Was it pretty, it was interesting? This was a little bit better, right? An easier read than our previous ones. We didn't read about a king who had, the dagger stuck in his stomach. We didn't read about too many heads getting chopped off, just 2. But what stood out to you in the text? Is there anything that stood out to you in the text? Okay. In what way? Right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah, from Wiersbe, huh? Yeah. 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 Right. True. Yeah, it was close to that number. I think 127, but that was pretty close. Camels. Yeah. Miss Al?
Yeah, I didn't hear what Carolyn said, but I might be piggybacking on top of it. You know, when God tells Gideon what he wants him to do, and he says, "But if you don't believe me, then go spy." And I think, I just think the audacity of Gideon to say, "All right, I think I'll go spy," because it's like he doesn't believe God, and it's like, I think, okay, you just had that whole fleece experience, the dry fleece, the wet fleece, and the food, and it's just like, seriously?
But he has to do 3.
Yeah.
It's always 3. Yeah, that's a good point. It comes in 3. But it just kills me. It's like, but if you don't believe me,
right,
you can go listen into their conversation, and then it's like, oh, then Gideon hears that. He's like, okay, I guess it's true.
Right.
Again, he must millennial kind of a thing. Not again any millennials. Maybe the one that the stereotypical millennial. That's
right.
All right, maybe I should have more proof before I invest myself in this. Just saying.
Digging a hole.
What?
Digging a hole is going to get hard.
So did any questions arise from the reading this week? Either in the book or in the Bible? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like you to speak to, does God make bad things happen to test our faith? Does he make bad things happen?
Okay.
To us.
That's a good question.
Just thinking about it.
All right.
Dangerous territory.
Did you want me to try to answer it now or just through the study?
I have thought of it.
Okay, good. We'll see if we can get to it in the study.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if you are being tested on your faith, God may be aware that you're not as rock solid as you need to be. So, because you're not as rock solid as you need to be, you may be making some borderline decisions. And we all know that the decisions we make often result in a consequence. And that's the bad thing that happens to you. God reaches in there and pulls you out of that, saying, see, you didn't believe me, you didn't listen to me, and you made the wrong choice.
I like that, Lynn, that's thank you,
Yeah.
that's a really good way to look at it.
Do I get a John?
Jesus
Well, I think that answer is adequate in a sense, but then the question arises, well, what about somebody who's born with a disability and they didn't have an action to lead to a consequence resulting in their disability, or in a particular disease that they acquired from their genetics? It wasn't a part that they played on themselves. And so although our actions, most of the time, it's our very own actions that lead to consequences, and then it's the actions of others that do the same, and we're left to deal with it.
Yeah.
But then sometimes we still have to wrestle with, like I like to call the existential crisis of my misfortune, where does that come from if I didn't have a play in it? And so, like I was saying in, I think, our first meeting or our second meeting, my understanding of misfortune or pain or suffering is threefold. Sometimes it's our own doing. Most of the times it is. I know we all have our different opinions on what happens in the environment, but we can all agree that typically when we burn certain chemicals, it affects our atmosphere. And when we throw away certain trash, it gets collected in the ocean. And so these are decisions that man makes that leads to consequences that not only other humans have to deal with, but other animal species as well. And so sometimes it's our own decisions, right? And then also sometimes it's just nature and the way that nature is, the way that storms form. When we talked about New Orleans and Katrina, that wasn't, some people would think, it's because of the way that the New Orleans folks are living, but I don't think that that's the way God would operate. I don't think that God, in God's grace and God's love, would condemn an entire city and geographical area. It's better to understand it as natural forces. And because we live in a world of nature, there are these natural forces at play. So when cold air meets warm air, we get storms. And then the other thing that I mentioned is, as we see evident in Scripture, there are evil forces in this world, regardless if we want to believe it or not, regardless if we experience it or not. The Bible is very clear that there is Satan who tested Job. There is Satan in 1 Peter who goes prowling around, seeking whom he may devour. And so my understanding of the root of suffering is humans' volition or choice, natural order, and then also evil forces. Now, all of that is still encapsulated in the will of God because God is still all-powerful. But it's not up to us to really understand everything because it's a mystery of faith. And at the end of the day, even if we don't understand the why, we can understand the what, which is that God loves us no matter what, and that there's still an opportunity for each and every one of us to experience eternity, if not in this life, then in the next. And that's what gives us hope and what I preached on the last time I preached. But, that's that. And so we'll try to get into Gideon, but yes.
Let me add a fourth one.
Yes.
And I would say sometimes it's our perception that's wrong.
Right.
So we think something's bad, but it might really be good. It's just that in the moment,
Right.
it's not what we want.
That's a good point. All right, so let's jump into Gideon with that. I hope I answered your question, or at least try to. All right. So we're going to recap from Gideon Part 1, which was chapter 6 in Judges. And so Who was Gideon? Can somebody tell me a little bit about the character of Gideon? What did we learn about him? He's the least of his tribe, right? Yep, Manasseh. Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. He was a farmer, right? And we know that because he's doing what when the angel visits him? Threshing wheat, exactly, in a wine press. Yeah, yeah. He wanted to hide. Do y'all remember why Gideon was hiding?
Keep it from being stolen.
Keep it from being stolen because he was oppressed, right?
Yes.
Right.
Everything they did was taken.
What did the angel tell Gideon? What did he call him? You remember the interaction in chapter 6 between the angel and Gideon? One of the first responses. Yep, right there in verse 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." So he's called a mighty warrior, even though we see in the rest of the text that he questions some things, right? And then what's another important thing about Gideon that will come out in chapter 7 as we read it? He also has a knowledge of his history, right? Immediately after verse 12, when the angel calls him mighty warrior, he misunderstands the whole entire message, and he goes into this litany of history and miracles and examples. And so he's recalling his history, which shows that he understands his history and his relationship with God and his people. So who were some of his enemies? Do you remember? The Midianites, right. And what other group? The text tells us that there are 3 groups. The Midianites, the Amalekites, right? Look at chapter 6, verse 3. Yeah. It's the Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples, right? So he's dealing with nomadic tribes, which are the Midianites. And remember last time we said that the Midianites had a relationship with Israel because who married a Midianite? Moses, right. Jethro's daughter. Exactly. And so these people groups are from the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, and they're also the nomadic tribe. So the story. Last week we talked about how in chapter 6 it said Israel did evil in the eyes of God, and then they were oppressed for 7 years under the Midianites, Amalekites, and the other eastern people groups. And during this time, do y'all remember how bad it got for them? Where were they living at in this time? In caves. Exactly. Caves, clefts in the rock, and in strongholds. And so what would happen is the Midianites would come during the time of harvest. They would take all of the harvest that they found. They would kill all of the livestock. And they would do this every single year, year in and year out, for 7 years. And so it left the Israelites with little to nothing, which is why we see Gideon with the angel threshing wheat in a wine press. Because when you thresh wheat, I'm not a farmer, but when you thresh wheat, poof, a big cloud comes up. And so that's an indication of where you are. And so Gideon did that in a wine press. And we talked last week also about what the wine press looks like. And so this here is an ancient representation of a wine press. So we talked about how this floor right here is actually where they would stomp on the grapes. And then the juices would flow through this area here, and it would collect in this part right here. And so where Gideon was probably down in this part. You can go to the next one. Or the previous one. My apologies. So Gideon was probably in this area in the vat because it was deeper, right? If you want to collect juice from here to there, you have to have a slope. So you're going to start threshing on the top so it flows down and it collects in the vat or the vat. And so where he probably was in the vat the vat when the angel met him. And so when when the people finally cry out to God, who does God actually send to them? Do you remember that? When the text tells us, all right, the Israelites got enough. They cried out to God. Prophet, right? This is the first time that a prophet was sent, correct? Normally God sends a judge immediately, but he sends a prophet this time. And what does the prophet say? Not specifically, but in what chapter of Judges do we read something similar to what the prophet says here in chapter 6? This is just a recap. Because remember, the prophet comes in, he reminds them of the covenant, and he tells them that they have broken the covenant, right? This is just like chapter 2, remember? In chapter 2, when the angel of the Lord came and he spoke these things to the people. Chapter 2, verse 1, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you out of Egypt. I led you into the land I swore to your ancestors. I said I would never break my covenant, etc., etc. And then it goes on to say in verse 21, because this nation has violated the covenant I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive them out. And so this is the same thing that the prophet does, right? So the prophet comes to the people, and then the angel goes to Gideon. And the angel appears to Gideon and says, mighty warrior. And then Gideon does what? Recount the history, right? And then we see Gideon says, and then the angel responds to him, go in the strength you have. And then Gideon says, pardon me, but my clan is the weakest. And so we have this interaction between the angel and between Gideon. And finally Gideon thinks, all right, you know what, you may be an angel. So he does what? He goes and prepares an offering. And what was
Tells the angel to wait.
Yeah, he tells the angel to wait, right?
You just wait there.
So he says, all right, angels, just sit on a rock for me for a while and just wait. And he goes and he prepares an offering, which was unleavened bread and meat. But how much flour did we say he probably used to make his bread? Y'all remember? It's a minor detail.
40 pounds.
40 pounds. There we go. That's a good memory. That's a good memory. 40 pounds of flour is probably what he used. But he's in poverty, right? So it goes to show the type of sacrifice he gave. And so when Gideon finally came back and the angel was there, he presented the offering. And what happened when he presented the offering? He burned it up, right? And so then we had this situation, and Gideon is commanded to then that night go and tear down his father's altar. But what does Gideon do? Right, right. And when does he do it?
At night.
At night, right? So at night, in the cover of darkness with 10 servants, he must have been kind of rich in poverty, 10 servants, 40 pounds of flour. But he goes and he breaks down the altar, and he uses the same wood from the altar to prepare a proper altar to God. And then we see in the morning the townspeople wake up, they discover what happened, and after careful investigation, the text says the people discovered it was Gideon. And then Gideon's father, the townspeople wanted to kill Gideon, but then remember what Gideon's father said in verse 31 of chapter 6?
Baal can fight his own battle.
Yeah, yeah. He says, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. And so after he defends himself, we see the Midianites are gathering again for the harvest. And that's when the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Gideon and he sounds the trumpet. And who were the first people group to join Gideon? Do you remember? Let's see. Look at verse 34. Chapter 6, verse 34. Right. Absbrites. However you pronounce it, right? One of those ites. And who are these people?
People that were threatening him.
Yeah, the same people that were threatening him are now joining him. Yeah. Right. So then he gathers the rest of them, and then we have the story of the fleece. You remember the story of the fleece? Mm-hmm. He says, if you make the fleece to be wet and the ground dry, I'll believe you. And then he comes back and says, well, if you make the ground wet and the fleece dry, I'll believe you. And we talked about how the fleece being wet and the ground dry is actually not a miracle because it happens from the moisture and air collecting. But the second one was a miracle. And so some things that we learned from Gideon chapter 6 is that God can send you a message anytime, not just when you are in worship. Gideon wasn't in worship, he was in work, at work. And God called him and had a message for him. We also learn, as Wiersbe says, it's worth noting that true believers can't build an altar to the Lord unless first they tear down the altars they build to the idols they worship. And so before we can really begin to do the work for God, we have to begin to start at home with our own selves and breaking down our own idols and whatever those may be. Okay, so are y'all ready for Gideon in chapter 7? All right. So we've set the stage. We know all the history. And it says, early in the morning, Jerubbaal, or Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in a valley near the hill of Moreth. This valley was a Jezreel valley. Do you remember what judge we talked about in the Jezreel valley? Deborah, right? Deborah fought what enemy? Sisera, yeah. Can somebody tell me what people group Sisera belonged to? Canaanites. There we go. Okay, so we already had a story with Deborah and the Canaanites in the Jezreel Valley. Now we see Gideon and the Midianites in the same valley. And so the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into your hands, or Israel will boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. So he had an army of 32,000 in total, and over 2/3 or half of his army just went away. Can you imagine being Gideon at that point? Right? What about like the other people that stayed? You know? It's like, oh, all of y'all are leaving. Okay. Yes, sir.
I think I read my study Bible that was considered sort of an honorable thing to do. I mean,
Right.
Because if you're there and you're afraid, your fear might be contagious to others.
Yeah.
To get you out of there, like the ones who are really afraid stays out.
Exactly. And that's what Deuteronomy 28 talks about. So in Deuteronomy 20, it's a chapter on going to war. And it says in verse 8, the officer shall add, is anyone afraid or faint-hearted? Let him go home so that his fellow soldiers will not become disheartened too. And so it was actually an honorable thing. I don't know if it was honorable, but it was an okay thing, right? Because it's in Scripture. There was a commandment that if you felt disheartened, don't go to war because it would ruin everybody else. And so 22,000 men and 10,000 remain. Tell me, what do y'all think about this quote that Wiersbe writes on page 75? There are two quotes there that I just want to talk about very briefly. He says here, the fearful and trembling man God cannot use. The trouble today is that the fearful and trembling men or women insist upon remaining in the army. A decrease that sifts the ranks of the church of men who fear and tremble is a great, a gracious, and a glorious gain. What do you think about that statement?
I mean, if you're fearful and you stay there, you're going to plant seeds of doubt, and it kind of takes away the power behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you're always going to be having people doubt. Even if you're strong in your faith and you hear somebody that constantly is fearful or woe be gone or unsure of what they're doing,
Right.
then it undermines what's supposed to be done.
Right. That's a good point. Thank you, Ms. Ho. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you exclude the people who are weak,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons you have church is for people who are unsteady
Mm-hmm.
in their faith to be surrounded by people who are strong to bolster them up and educate them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's excluding these folks. You can't have it both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
But I think when you're
going through a trial of any type, you need to
make sure you're surrounding yourselves with the people that are strong
Mhm.
and not the, I mean, it's one thing to have one or two people in your circle that are
Right,
doubters
right.
or negative, but when you're going through a trial, you need to seek out and be with those friendships that are strong
Mhm.
in their faith, not hanging with the people that are all doubting. I mean, you need to take responsibility to do that, because otherwise it can derail you.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Those are good points. It says something when you are hanging around Christians that are doubtful in a particular thing in life. It's almost like saying if you're in a crisis in life, you don't want to call on a person who doubts, right? If you need God to show up in your life, you're not going to call the person who doubts that God can. You're going to call the person who knows that God will. Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I think of my grandson David, when he was diagnosed, first he was diagnosed, several people contacted them because of the whole network. And I asked my daughter-in-law, how are you dealing with this? She said, I can't deal with the cases that have no hope yet. She said, I need to hear from the people that have hope. And she said, and once we get a good sure footing here, then I'm going to deal with the possibilities of what could go wrong. And I think sometimes, we're always quick to share advice with people because that's what we do. But we have to understand that when people go through like battles and tragedies, I mean, look at Stephen, you need to hear the positive to know that there's hope, and then you can deal with there could be some pitfalls and things that don't go exactly what you want to go.
Right. Right. Yes, ma'am.
My son is a survivor of stage 4 cancer when he was 20 years old. And he and I are both camp care volunteers. And I'll have people say, oh, that's a wonderful organization, I would like to do it. But my husband died of cancer and I want to help another one. And unfortunately, they don't accept people as volunteers that have lost someone. Because the whole idea is they want someone to give them hope. Now, later on down the road, if they do lose this person that's been fighting, they have resources for you to connect with people that deal with loss. But the whole idea is, like Linda said, to give them hope and to know somebody. There's nothing worse than having your loved one diagnosed with something and everybody that you turn to says, oh yeah, my so-and-so died of that. My best friend died of that. You don't want to hear that. You need someone to say, I've been through this.
Right.
And, we made it.
Yeah. Praise God. That's amazing. And I think this is true because what he goes on to say too is that pride after the battle robs God of his glory, and fear during the battle robs God's soldiers of courage and power. Down there on page 75. And so essentially it's that we want to hear the good news, right? We want to hear the good news. We want to know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We want to know the God who delivered this person and their story. We want the hope that the good news brings. And we want people who are bold in that and courageous in that, like Joshua was, right? That just goes to show something. And so I think that also there's this duality at place for me. I think that there's a duality of those who are fearful and those who are lacking courage. They still should be included in the fold in the general sense, because some of you are bakers in this room, but one of my previous supervisors when I was working at Cameron School of Theology, she is a chef, and she said, when you put bread in the oven and you separate it all, the dough that has the least amount of dough will rise the lowest, and the dough that has the most amount will rise highest. Well, if you put them all together and you clump them together, the dough with the least amount is going to rise at an even level with everything else. And so there's something that happens when we're in community with people, because we build up our strength, we build up our hope, we build up our stories together. But yet and still, when we're in a time of need, when we're in a time of war, which is I think where Gideon is, okay, that's nice, but I need some prayer warriors with me. Right? I need some people who know the good news, who can pray scriptures, who can call on the mighty name of Jesus and know that a change will come from me. And so, it's interesting too that God repurposes the fearful. And we'll see this later in Gideon. So in Gideon verses 4 through 8, you see the second sifting. So we had the first one, the 10,000 leave because their hearts were just disheartened. They were a little, afraid or something. They wanted to get back home. They didn't want to lose their lives and those things, whatever the case may be. And so God says there are still too many men. Wiersbe makes this comment: if Gideon's faith had been in the size of his army, then his faith would have been very weak by the time God was done with him. Because he took from 32,000 all the way down to 300. And so the second sip we see here, if you can put the picture up of, let's see that one. Yep, this one. So this is the second sip, right? He takes them down to the river and he has them to drink water. Very simple task. So God says, take them down to the water and I will thin them out for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, you shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, you shall not go. Now this sifting is more of an individual type of filter. The first one, people could self-select. But this one, God and Gideon are working together to select the people themselves. And so God is instructing Gideon to sift them out. But before we go into detail about what this looks like, I should make a point about the action that's taking place as a whole. Drinking water from a spring was an ordinary task that many soldiers would participate in, and God uses this to sort the ranks. So God takes an ordinary task and still uses it to do something extraordinary for his purpose. Wiersbe picks up on this on page 76. He says, we never know when God is testing us in some ordinary experience of life. And he then proceeds to tell about the story of the senior pastor's method for weeding out associates. The senior pastor would take associates on a car ride, but would, I guess, ask the associate to drive. And based on how the associates rode and how clean their car was, and how their conversations were, he would determine, is this the man for me or not? Is this the woman for me or not? But God uses some of those ordinary things, right? There's a scripture that says, what? If you are faithful in little things, you will get more, because of our responsibility and how we take care of little. There's a great quote that said, if a man can't be faithful over a little field, then why should we give him acres? And so, or a woman, of course. And so the sifting happens. So the men go down to the spring of air for a drink, and God tells Gideon, separate those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps water from those who kneel down to drink. And 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs, and all the rest got down on their knees. When y'all read this, did you wonder the same thing? I wondered, like, how does this look different? Right? What does this even look like, God? What are you trying to tell us? And so, because to me, I'm thinking those need to be on the easy way to drink, right? Regardless if you cup the water or lap like a dog.
But if you cup the water, you're looking out the horizon, looking for the enemy.
Right. And that's another thing. And so one commentator wrote that this test was to see which man stood alert and which didn't. So in the next picture I'll show you, I have a cute dog in the middle, and then 2 wolves on the side, right? Just to balance it out. And so the idea was those who got down on their knees, which if you're looking over here to the right, are these 3 gentlemen there, they aren't looking up and aren't alert at all, because they're focusing down. This gentleman is lapping it like a dog, cupping it in his hands. And it's the same thing that happens here, right? You see the difference there. People cupping it in their hands and they're lapping because they're staying alert. This is the same that animals do as well. So you see what the writer is getting at, even though he uses the word dog or what's translated as dog, we can still use wolf the same. And so as a wolf is lapping water, they're still alert, they're still paying attention to their environment. And so some scholars believe that this is the reason why those 300 men are chosen, because they're the ones that are in the game, they're still alert, etc., etc. But does the text actually say that? Does our text actually say the reason they're chosen is because they lapped the water like dogs who stay alert? Right. So again, we can't read into the text. We can only guess that this is the reason for their selection. Plus, Wiersbe notes on the bottom of page 76 The enemy was 4 miles away, and Gideon surely would not lead his man into danger. But even that's reading into the text, right? So we don't know if Gideon would have done it or he wouldn't. The only thing we know at the end of the day as readers of Scripture is that God took a reduced group of 10,000 and even reduced it further to 300. So God started with 32,000, he moved to 10,000, and now he's down to 300.
It's kind of like the Navy SEALs, isn't it?
Yeah, just like Navy SEALs. The Army Rangers. Yes, ma'am.
Something going for writing the car character in band, I think, my grandfather told my dad that you could tell his character by the condition of his shoes, and that you always paid attention to how shiny your shoes were.
Right.
My dad has that on tape, and I have never forgot that because it was a head scratcher. Like, really? But what about tennis shoes? Anyway, I think that's kind of interesting that
Right.
I think it kind of goes with that.
Yeah, for sure. That goes with the previous comment about how God can take an ordinary task and use it as a way to set us out. I have a mentor of mine. He's a bishop of the church, and one of the things he likes to tell people is, you know, people say money is the root of all evil, etc., but all money does is amplify. So, for instance, he said his voice, we have funds in the church to purchase a microphone, and the microphone amplifies my voice. And when we have money in our lives, it amplifies what we're able to do, and it also amplifies our character traits, because now we have the freedom to make decisions that otherwise are limited. And so it goes back to that idea of what we do with the little that we have can really determine what we do with the more. But going back to Gideon, 300 men are selected from 32,000. And it's because they're laughing water. And God took it from Deuteronomy 28 and them self-selecting with the condition of their heart to now God and Gideon selecting them based upon, really God selecting them based upon the way they drink water. So next time you go to the water fountain, be careful. So God says, with the 300 men that lack water, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. And so Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets of the rest. So, as I asked before, can you imagine the 300 remained and how it must have felt? You were among a crowd of 32,000, and now you're one of 300.
Watch it all leave.
Yeah, you watch them all leave. Exactly. But then the other thing to think about too is, can you imagine what it's like to be a Midianite spy? So you're seeing the enemy with 32,000. Okay, you're telling the commander they have 32,000. But then you watch and like, wait, okay, now it's 10,000. And now it's 300. What's going on? And so,
So I've got them. There's only 300 of them. We'll take them easily.
right, we'll take them easily, exactly. And so the text is drawing our attention to the fact that there were 32,000 that came with their provision. They were allowed to leave, but the 10,000, they were allowed to leave, but they had to leave their provisions behind.
Oh.
You see that in the text? So whatever they had with them, their weapons, their trumpets, or ram's horn, jars, those sorts of things, they all keep that behind. And so now we see that the next part of our story is God speaks to Gideon and gives him encouragement. So while the Midianites were camping in the valley, God spoke to Gideon. And he said to him, "Get up and go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they're saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." And so he gave him a conditional statement. if you are afraid, go down to the camp. Gideon goes down to the camp, so that means he's afraid, right? You would have thought he would have learned from the fleece and the angel and
The burden of the food.
yeah. But lo and behold, he's a millennial. So I was just kidding. I love my generation. So he goes down to the camp with his servant, and there the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern people settled in the valley, the Jezreel Valley. And they were thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Do you remember that from our last class and when I talked about what that looked like? Can you see the difference between the three pictures? So this is farmer's field and locusts, and that's what it looks like. This was actually in Israel when they had a swarm of locusts coming on one of their state highways. You can't see the highway because I cropped it. But then this is also a picture of maybe what an army would look like. When he says they covered the field, they were like locusts. They were everywhere. It could be a hyperbole in the sense of an extreme exaggeration, but it really probably is honestly what it looked like. Because as we'll read in chapter 8 of Gideon, Judges, there's around 127,000 of them. And so you can only imagine what that looked like. And so Gideon and Purah go down to the camp, and when they arrive just as a man was telling a friend his dream in verse 13. He says, I had a dream. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent turned and collapsed. His friend then asked him, his friend responded, this could be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. The first question that I asked myself was, how did he know this? It's a dream of a round loaf of barley bread and a tent. So you can go to the next one. So this is a picture of maybe what barley bread looks like. It's very small, kind of brittle. Think like prison bread from the Roman soldiers. And then this is kind of like a nomadic tent that people may put up. This is more modern, of course. But in his dream, he sees this rolling against this, crashing against it, and it says, Gideon's going to conquer us. And so the next picture I have to show you is probably something like that. Big piece of bread, crushing a tent.
Wow.
And maybe some Hebrew translation of the word ouch, right? But anyway, let's go back to the two images that he had there. So how does he know that, yes, sir?
And the thing that struck me was looking at the guy who had the dream, who interpreted the dreams, and explaining the interpreted dream. How would his friend know what the dream that
Right.
is?
Right, exactly. And that's what I was going to ask. So how do you think that the friend knew his friend's dream, right? These are the Midianites we're talking about. Because remember, Gideon's overhearing them. So how did they know this was the interpretation?
God put it in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all part of God's plan. He was not doubting
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah. That's a good point, Mr. Lee. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Wild guess, right? So, what some scholars and commentators said is that what actually happened is the barley bread was a poor person's choice of food. And so there's a connection to the Israelites and it being poor. And there's also the connection to it being farmers, which the Israelites were. And so when he saw the bread, he could have thought, okay, this is the poor Israelites. And then when he saw the tent, remember the Midianites were a nomadic tribe. And so they always carried tents with their cattle and stuff like that. And so he saw the poor Israelite rolling up against the nomadic tent. And so what he probably saw is, or interpreted, was Gideon was going to conquer us. Dreams were also regarded as a divinely inspired enemy's dream. Dreams were regarded as divinely inspired. And so Gideon, when he heard this dream, That's probably why he decided to believe. But that's still interesting, isn't it? Because you would think the fleece would help him to believe. You would think the angel fire would help him to believe. You would think that him not being killed by the Amalekites, his own people group, would help him to believe. But what took him to believe was a dream being interpreted by his enemies among his enemies.
But they're taking something that it just seems so crazy to even believe that
Right.
some small little loaf could topple a tent.
Right.
And that, if we dream that, we think it's silly.
Right.
But it struck terror in those soldiers' hearts.
Right.
That enough so that they spoke it aloud.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just thinking, oh, I wonder what that means. It could mean that. They spoke it aloud.
Right.
It's like to see that terror is there, to realize there's some validity behind this. Because apparently it's something that means something to these soldiers.
Right.
And I think, we sometimes lose the fact we look at these giant things and we realize that, David Goliath, the smallest of all, would topple the giant.
Yeah.
And this would be like a barley loaf taken down a tent. But
Right.
Well, like you were saying earlier, that fear spread.
yes,
You know,
fear spreads.
the Israelites didn't have fear, or even not the ones that may have had fear. But for many times, that fear spread throughout, and so that when getting an attack, that's where the panic all starts in, right? at that
They didn't get rid of those people, did they?
They didn't get rid of those people.
And they kind of like yeast got in.
Right. But it is interesting though, as it's always
You get your start.
as it's always bringing up
Half star,
and others, there's something to note about dreams, right? We see in Scripture that God can communicate to us through dreams, and such as with Jacob, right? With Joseph, the dreams that Solomon got, Daniel, and Joseph, the son of Mary. Some of the ones that I put on your handout there at the bottom right was a dream that Jacob got, was a dream that Joseph received, right? The moon and the stars gone down. Solomon, and also the dreams of Daniel. So dreams are a form of God communicating to us. And we also see in Joel 2:28, Acts 2:17. Acts 2:17 is after Pentecost, and this is when Peter is showing them that he's quoting Joel 2:28, and he says, "Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, and your old man will dream dreams." And dreams can even be given to non-believers, right? Think of Nebuchadnezzar and the dream that he had, and the iron statue, and the gold statue, and how it went all the way down to clay. We had the dream of Abimelech, and also the two prisoners that were with Joseph. So, dreams are a way that God can communicate to us in a very spiritual way, but it's one thing to dream a dream, and it's another thing to interpret it. And so, both are gifts, I believe, of spirit, because we can dream things, and sometimes they may not mean anything, and sometimes they may. It takes somebody who actually knows how to interpret dreams and is gifted with that to help us and interpret our dreams. Because sometimes things stand for symbols, as with the bread and the tent. And sometimes the things we see are actually the people. And this is why Wiersbe says dreams can be deceptive and difficult to interpret. And it requires a divine instruction in order to truly interpret the message of a dream. Is everybody with me so far? All right, so next time you go to sleep and you dream something, it could mean something, honestly. So the best thing to do is to write it down. If you have a prayer journal and you dream something at night, write it down and begin to pray to God. What does this mean? Right? What does it mean when I see a Ferris wheel spinning this fast, or when I'm seeing this football game and these two teams playing? These sorts of things. But that's a little more charismatic and Pentecostal. So I'll leave that there.
It's not in July, but you ate last night.
No. All right, so we get into verses 15 through 22, which is what I call Gideon and his mighty men at the battle of the hill of Moreh, 15 through 22. So it says that after he hears this dream and after he hears this oracle, he's encouraged. And so he bowed down and he worshiped and he returned to the camp of Israel. I think it's important that the writer is drawing our attention to the fact that Joshua worshiped. So before he heard a promise from God, and then he experienced that promise, but before he went any further, he stopped and he worshiped God. And this is the same thing that actually happened with Joshua, right? Before Joshua went into Jericho, he worshiped God. And so there I have at the bottom of the sheet the Jericho connection with Joshua. Joshua worships at Jericho. And so Gideon returns to the camp of Israel and he calls out, "Get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." And he divides then the 300 men into 3 different companies and gives each of them trumpets and empty jars with torches inside. Did that strike anybody when you read it? The empty jars with torches inside? Yeah. I was like, all right, they got bombs back in the day, right? Flash grenades. So I was like, that's really interesting, God. So they're going to blow a horn and throw grenades. And so we kind of learn later why the empty jars are used. So the battle begins, and we see is that one of the things that Gideon does in verse 17 is he says, "Watch me." Then he says, "Follow my lead, and when I get to the edge of camp, do exactly as I do. And when I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours, and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." Before we go any further, I want to dissect this text a little bit, because I think that this shows Gideon's leadership style. We see first that he tells them to watch, then he tells them to follow, and then he tells them to do. I think that's a mark of a mature leader. Before they get you to do something, they want you to observe them doing it, and then they want you to participate in and following them, and then they want to empower you to go and do it, right? You see, I do, we talk. You do, I watch, we talk, that sort of thing. Has anybody heard that before? Mm-hmm. Right. So this is a sign of how mature Gideon is. And then I find it interesting, why does the text say that they shouted for the Lord and for Gideon? Did anybody find that interesting? It seems,
Not here. Well, they want to surprise them and make it seem like there's a large army against them, right?
Okay. One thought is it's a large army, isn't it?
But if they had a dream about it, and they talk about Gideon, and they hear that name, it's like, oh, here comes the dream, it's coming to life, it's coming.
That's a good point.
Also, if it's the Lord,
Oh, yeah, the Lord comes first, and then the Lord's coming, and Gideon's following the Lord. Here he comes.
Exactly. That's a good point. And the Lord there is actually Yahweh. In the text, it's Yahweh. So they're saying the proper name of the Israelite God and Gideon. And so I think that's a good play on the interpretation. Because sometimes when we're reading scripture, we also have to try to understand the author's intent. There's a reason that the interpretation of the dream was given. It's a reason that Gideon heard it, and then there's a reason why Gideon told the men to shout for Yahweh and also for Gideon. And then I feel also God told me that if we look at the first sifting that occurred, you had the 32,000 become 10,000 because of the fear and the doubt, right? But now imagine what the Midianites were like at night when they heard the interpretation. Some of them began to fear and to doubt. And we see that this actually does have a big impact on people. That's a good word, thank you. So Gideon now takes the lead. Sure, he tells them watch, follow, do. And then the attacks were to be coordinated in the sense of 2 or 3 ways because there were 3 companies. And we know Gideon was a part of one of these groups because verse 19 actually tells us that. It says Gideon and 100 men with him reached the edge of camp at the beginning of the middle watch, which was around 10 p.m. or so. There was only about 3 watches in the night. And so they arrived at around 10 to 11 p.m. just after they changed the guard And they blew their trumpets, they broke the jars that were in their hands, and the three companies then blew the trumpets, smashed the jars, and grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. So, can anybody tell us what this looks like?
Chaos.
Chaos? Okay. Chaos, right. So what were the Israelites doing? What was kind of like their sequence of actions? We have a trumpet, we have jars with fire in it, and we also have swords.
It sounds like mental warfare to me.
Okay.
And each guy had a trumpet. You figure normally with a company of men of 300 or so, you had one trumpet, and now you got everybody having trumpets. It's a loud noise, and I'm like, my gosh, the rest of them come back. That's what I would think. And all the lights and the crashing of the cars was a big commotion.
Right.
And if you're in the middle of the night, you hear commotion, you don't recognize it. Your mind is kind of hits the worst hit.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
I think also the timing is interesting because of the change of the guard. And so it's almost always a time of chaos in the military anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's at night, it's the changing of the guard, there's already chaos in that, and then they do all that, and even greater chaos.
Right. That's a good point, yes, sir.
It's interesting that Gideon gave instructions to shout for the Lord and for Gideon. When they actually launched their attack, it's a sword for the Lord and for Gideon.
Mm-hmm.
They had something in one hand and pushing the other.
Yeah.
The sword didn't have to be included in the head talk
Right. Yeah. But these are good points too, because I think it takes somebody with military experience to fully bring to life this text, because they are indeed in war. And as Mr. Lee was making note of, when you go to war in your company, not everybody has a horn, a trumpet, or a musical instrument. It's typically one or two, or maybe just a small group of a larger number. So if that's the understanding of people at the time, because even remember with the Israelites army, the Ark of the Covenant used to go before Joshua, and then all the worshipers and the singers, and then after that would be the entire army. And those worshipers and singers were a small group of the larger tribe. And so with the 10,000 leaving behind all of their provisions, it allowed for each of the 300 to have a trumpet and to have the empty jar with the torch inside. And so we can probably imagine that what might have been going on in their minds, they're hearing all these trumpets, and instead of thinking about each, the trumpets representing one person, they could have been thinking about the trumpets representing thousands and multiples. And so the chaos ensues also because of the change of the guard. Yes, ma'am.
Well, also it comes in from 3 different directions.
Right,
So it just seems like they're all, they're surrounded, except they do leave the way out.
right,
If they want to run, then they can run.
right,
I think it's just that idea, like in the middle of the night, and you
Right.
go from all 3 sides, it's like,
yeah,
it's gotta be huge.
exactly. And remember, where were they camped at? Where were the Midianites camped at? In the valley. So if the enemy is on 3 sides, what's on the 4th? A mountain, right? So they probably felt like it was just all types of traps. And so Gideon and his men reached the end of the camp, beginning at the middle of watch, and then that's when they shouted what they did. And so they said, "The sword for the Lord and for Gideon." And while each person held position around the camp, all the Midianites ran. So the Israelites stayed put, just kept going, making these crazy sounds, and just watched the enemy flee. And so then after they see that, let's see, Midianites crying out as they fled. In verse 22, when the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other. So there was confusion first, and now God is causing each of them to turn on each other with their swords. And then the army fled to Bethsheba toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel-Meholah, near Tabith. I'm an English speaker trying to pronounce Hebrew words. But the Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. I think that's an interesting point, too, because God caused the confusion, right? God caused them to turn on themselves. And then they began to flee. Now, the confusion could have came because of the trumpets, the torches, the night, the change in guard, the interpretation. All those things come out in the light of the text. But the main thing here is that it was God who caused the Midianites and the enemy to fight amongst themselves. And the author makes very clear that that's what God did. And the question I thought about was, how many of us know that when we start taking action for God in our lives, God also takes action with us? Remember, the book of James says, as we draw nearer to God, God draws nearer to us. Flee from the devil, and the devil will flee from you, those sorts of things. And we also talked last week about what my father-in-law likes to say, without you, God won't, and without God, we can't. So without God, the Israelite army of 300 would have definitely been annihilated by the 127,000 Midianites with camels and people that looked like locusts in the field. And without the faith and action of Gideon and the 300, the enemies would not have been thrown into confusion and routed. And so without you, without us, God won't, and without God, we can't. And so the army then flees down, and the message is sent. Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh were all called out. Now remember, there were 32,000 at first, and now there are 300. Remember, there were about 22,000 that left because of their fear of heart. I think it's probably safe to imagine that some of those 22,000 were the same who came at the call that we read about here in verse 23 through 25. They were probably some of the same volunteers who joined earlier but were fearful and went home. And so sometimes we may need evidence before we believe, but yet and still God gives us opportunity for us to have faith again. So what I mentioned earlier is that God redeems our fear. God can still use the fearful. Even when we are afraid, even when we're doubting, God still wants to give us opportunities to believe yet and yet again, either in the good news or on what's occurring in our lives. And so then we get to verse 9, and not verse 9, sorry, but then we get to the end there, and it says, all the Israelites were called out from these tribes. Gideon then sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them, as far as Beth Barah. So if I can get this one. Okay, so this is what's happening, okay? If you want to go see the trail rock, please feel free to do so. We have 8 minutes. Okay, cool. We have 8 minutes in the class. I want to draw your attention to what's happening here, right? So this is where the enemy is camping out down here. The Israelites from these 3 tribes group over in this area, and so then they encircle the enemy right on the 3 sides, and then the enemy flees. Some of them are killed in the confusion, but some of them then flee. The route that they take is through the valley at the end of it, all the way down here, running along the Jordan River. And what we talked about in the first or third class is that there's a trail that literally takes you all the way to Jericho, from the top to Jericho. This was an international roadway at that time. I mean, Rome built a lot of the roads, but you still needed a standard pathway for traveling. And so this was one of the standard pathways that people took, was to walk alongside the Jordan River. And so when they began to flee, down here to the south. And so you can see why Ephraim and the hillside were called to block them at the river. Because most of the time they crossed over from Jericho into Israel. Does that make sense? Okay. So they're confused. Some of them are killed up top in the northwest. Some of them come down and they're killed there. And so all of the men of Ephraim every last one of them, were called out, and they seized the water of the Jordans as far as Bethbar. And they also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And they pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the river Jordan. So, I don't know if this means anything to anybody, but Oreb is translated as raven. Zeb is translated as wolf, so they killed the raven and the wolf at the rock of the wolf and at the winepress of Zeb. And so the heads were brought to Gideon. Remember, we are in today's day and age, so you can't take pictures, snapshots, tweets, Facebook posts, Polaroids. So the evidence to confirm that somebody was killed is just bring the head. It's terrible.
That'll do it.
That'll do it. You know, if somebody brought you the head of the enemy, you'll be like, okay, well, I think they're dead. I think you got them. So, in conclusion, Wiersbe said, before we get into our questions for discussion, Wiersbe says on page 82, the story of Gideon began with a man hiding in a winepress, in chapter 6, verse 11. But it ended with the enemy prince being slain at a winepress. The story of Gideon is also about faith. God took 300 men to battle against 127,000 men. If you look at Judges 8 and 10, just flip over there real quick. This is where I get the number from. It says Zebah and Zalmunna were in a Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men. All that were left of the armies of the eastern people, 127,000 swordsmen, had fallen. So it's really 127 plus 15,000. This is about 142 to 150,000. So 127,000 of them were slain in this battle. And so Wiersbe says at the bottom of page 78 that God, at the top of it, God had to deal with the fear that still persisted in Gideon's heart. God had already told Gideon 3 times that he would give Israel victory with the encounter of the angel. And he had reassured him by giving 3 special signs: fire from the rock, the wet fleece, and the dry fleece. And after all this divine help, Gideon should have been strong in his faith, but such was not the case. And so we see that even though Gideon was encouraged before the battle, he needed to be encouraged during the battle as well. And so, does anybody have any questions before we move on? I know we're getting to the end here, and I want to kind of draw our attention to some of the questions here at the back. So, let's see here. Let's see. What have you learned about faith from Gideon's experiences? Question number 9.
Well, simply, if God is with you, God is with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to just rely on that.
Right. God is with you, God is with you. You need to just rely on that.
Well, it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, a lot easier said than done. That's a good point.
He's a God of grace that overlooks our insecurities.
Yeah. That's a good point. The God of grace will overlook our insecurities. Yes.
Well,
He has something for you to do, he'll keep pursuing you. When he has something for you to do, he will keep pursuing you.
When God has something for you to do, he will keep pursuing you. One of the old saints used to say, when God gets a hold of you, he won't let go.
That's kind of what I had thought also, that even though we struggle with our faith,
Mm-hmm.
and if we're trying, and God sees that, I think he'll always keep coming after us,
Mm-hmm.
or keep coming to us to help strengthen our faith.
Mm-hmm.
But I have one other, not necessarily a question, but when these soldiers were drinking the water,
Mm-hmm.
and the ones that were watchful and had like a cup or their hands that were watching, do you think that's kind of an analogy for us today, to always be watchful for what's around us, what's going on, concerning the sin around us and the temptations around us, to be watchful?
I definitely think it can. I definitely think that the the soldiers drinking from the water with clasped hands and being alert can serve as an analogy for us to be on guard against sin in our lives and other things that go on. I definitely think it can. Yes, sir.
I think it also shows that God takes a common man, not a military general to lead it, but a common man, that as long as he has the power of God behind him, nothing is impossible. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last question I have for us as we wrap up here is this question. How would you define faith in 1 or 2 sentences? Just 1 or 2.
Total trust in God, confidence to work with big, bad situations.
Total trust in God, confidence in your work with bad situations. Okay. Someone else, how would you define faith in 1 or 2 sentences? If somebody off the street were to come to you, say as you leave from here, you go to Kroger and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, what is the definition of faith? What does it mean as a Christian?
Trusting in something you can't see or can't.
Well, unbelief, be blessed to believe.
To believe, trusting in something you can't see or alone, believe, be a blessing. Right? You know,
Believing without truth.
Sir?
Believing without proof.
Believing without truth. Proof, yeah. That's true. You know, what does Hebrews say about that?
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen.
Right. The substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things unseen. Faith, right? So the substance of something is what makes it up. So we have hope because we have faith, right? You can't have hope without having faith. So faith is hope because it gives you hope. But also it gives you the reassurance that even if you don't see what's going on in life right now, that it's still working. It's almost like, I think it was the prophet Elisha when the enemy was gathering around the gates of the fortress and his servant was fearful and said, do you not see all of these people that are coming to kill us? And then the prophet said, oh, bless your heart, son. God opened his eyes so that he would be able to see. And if you know the story, you know that when God opened his eyes, he saw the chariots from heaven surrounding the enemy that was surrounding them. And so however we define faith, if it's in Hebrews or if it's our own personal definition, we know that faith gives us hope because it's the good news that keeps us on. So, and with that, I think that we could conclude today's lesson. Let me make sure I want to read something. Yeah, here's a good point too. And this is what Mr. Lee was talking about. I know we just talked about faith, but I want to leave you all with this. When a church starts to depend on bigness, big buildings, big crowds, big budgets, then faith becomes misplaced and God can't give his blessings. When leaders depend on their education, skill, and experience rather than on God, then God abandons them and looks for a Gideon. And I think this is a powerful way of ending today's message on faith. Would anybody like to close us in prayer, or would you like for me to offer it for us? I can do it. All right. God, we thank you so much for another day that was not promised to us. And although we are sometimes a reluctant people, a doubtful people, people of weird ways, God, you still find the time to be patient. You still find the time to be encouraging, to find us where we are in our lives and to redeem us and to repurpose us. And so, God, we thank you for the message that comes from Judges chapter 7, the story of Gideon, the man you encouraged before the war, and the man you encouraged during the war. God, wherever anybody in this room may be in their life, whatever wars they may be in, or whatever supporting forces they may be providing. Some of us are Gideon, some of us are pure. Some of us are the servant who goes with the leader or goes with the person into war. Wherever they may be, God, I pray that you would show them the strategy you have for their life, that you would show them the mighty works that you would do, and that you would help all of us, God, to not allow our pride to take away your glory in winning the battle, nor our fear and doubt to take away from the work you're doing. Strengthen our faith, God. Help us to believe in you even when circumstances are difficult, And most of all, God, may you remind us that even if in this life things aren't looking well, even if in this life we are suffering and under misfortune for whatever the causes may be, if we can focus on the little bit that you give us, on the care of life and souls in our family and our community, breaking down the altars of the heart and mind, then, oh God, we have an opportunity to hear your words spoken in the ruler in Matthew. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. Now come on up and enjoy the fruits of the kingdom. Holy Spirit, be in us and pray for us and embolden us on our path of sanctification as we walk in your grace, as we walk in your glory and not by our sight. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.